So we're going to take a look at the Salerno. This is the variable combat series. Supposedly, very close follow through on what I just did, which was over there. You can see Patton's Third Army, which I found out was indeed actually released as the first of the series, and it was a magazine game. And I did not think that. I thought like the Central Front series. It was released, hey, let's do two as magazine games and slip one in and make people buy it if they like the series, get them hooked on the series and get them to buy it. Anyway, this one is a much later revision of the game. Different designer. I've got the designer's notes somewhere. Nathan Kilgore, who is active at BGG at least. And I'm going to jump into the rules in a little bit, but I want to say something. First of all, I picked this up because I wanted to see, hey, I kind of remembered liking the old Victory in the West system, and this is based on that. I'd like to see what's done with it. Well, there are a few things that are done with it. First of all, and you can see I'm not completely set up yet, and that's always a bad sign, right? The rules that came from the Victory in the West system have largely been ported over. There are some small changes. There are some additions that feel a little bit more like, hey, let's make the game heavier, okay. One thing that I can say that's very good about it is, for whatever reason, Multi-Man Publishing sometimes puts things out on this really heavy stock. I thought only the Gamers Games did it. Boy, they did a great job on the printing on this. I read through the basic rules for this, and I kind of had feels like they're throwing a little bit more in. I'm not sure I'm really in favor of that, but okay. It looks like they're trying to fix a couple of issues that maybe aren't really issues at all. But again, fine, I can understand that kind of stuff. For the most part, they took the Sicily rules and added all the options and bells and whistles that went into Sicily into the base rules for this, which, you don't need all those bells and whistles if you're not doing a landing game, but if the designer wants to focus on Italy, that makes sense, and in Salerno, you'd be doing that. Now, he apparently claims to have designed another game in this series, but maybe not branded as Variable Combat Series. I think this may be the only game actually on the Variable Combat Series. Looks like a bulge type thing. It's like Panzers in the Ardennes, using a similar derived system. Then I got to the actual Salerno exclusive rules, and man, they start adding a lot more to the already kind of heavily burdened Sicily rules. And yes, we're dealing with things like the terrain elevations and everything like that. A lot looks kind of familiar, but you'll see like the combat chart, it has different results on it. Like this B, that's a both lose one. Makes some sense to me, but again, that may actually result in some weird reactions, as it were. But as I was reading through this, I'm kind of saying, I kind of just don't get it. There's some new stuff in here that doesn't feel like, it just absorbs into my understanding very quickly. So some of that was cleared away when I started setting up the map, and I realized, so these are transition boxes between the maps. There's basically 3 maps to the game, and they're segmented, and you kind of shift between one and the other. You have like this waiting and then ready or whatever, and we'll see how that all works out. But it doesn't look exactly how I expected it to, and I've still got some questions, but my original was, it's going to be some track that you follow. I don't think that's the case, but I'm not absolutely certain. So we'll see. We'll see how this actually works out. I think maybe it's you go anywhere in the waiting to anywhere in the ready, but again, it does not look like it makes immediate sense to me, and it didn't make sense when I was reading it. You also have rules for units beginning to that land in smaller pieces and then are reassembled, and some of the German garrisons here also assemble into larger forces, and that leaves me with a okay. But where I got to the problem is the setup rules. And, you know, you fuck up setup, and it means that, like, the game is never, you know, if you make the setup rules hard to cope with, you're going to lose players right away on that. I'm really fucking close because I've got a bunch of units. Now, some of these may be units that are put together out of other units. Some of them are very clearly not. I can't find them on the setup rules. There are other scenarios, and maybe they're in those. So I've just got like this pool of units that I'm not sure what the fuck they're about. And there isn't a really good description of that. Now, also, these rules, and it may be because I already know the rules and I'm just reading through stuff I know, but these appeared to me to be better organized. When I got to the exclusive rules here, it felt like there was sort of a disorganization, an unwillingness to repeat things or to reference, like cross-reference rules sections, etc. I am kind of really close to the point where I'm just going to say fuck it and turn it down, because I don't know if I've even got the right units, you know. Like here, so they've kind of got what is present in each location, but we have 2 waves of invasion here, and then if we look here at Toronto, the 1-1 AB is in the first wave. Well, first of all, this is not the 1-1 AB. There is nothing marked 1-1 AB, but this is the one of the first paratrooper, which sounds like it might be right, but you see, here's the problem. I've got all these loose units, and these are assault units, which are usually used for the invasion, and maybe you're not supposed to use breakdown units in the historical scenario, and you have the option to use them in some variable campaign, which actually is referenced, but I don't know if it's here. Like, there's additional scenarios. There's no campaign scenario actually spelled out there. Some of these additional scenarios, so this is one, I don't know what the fuck it's up with it, but you know, it says fictional scenario, and I'm like, well, I don't want to look at that yet. Gavin's Gambit, scrub the mission. Yeah, I don't want to deal with that. Race for Casino, a fictional proposal. Okay, well, it's not time for that. Invasion tutorial, it might make sense to do that. There's no question. And then nothing else, and then we get to historical scenario, and there's no rules for the historical scenario, so I assume all gameplay rules come into effect here. And I don't know, you know. I think victory conditions are covered somewhere. But yeah, I'm left with I kind of feel like not everything was provided in the game, and there's not a clear explanation of, you know, what's up with these units, etc. Now, maybe as we work through the rules, we're going to find out. For now, they're just all going in the box. There's a lot of units, too. Now, some of these, let's take a look here. So I look at the 141. I should have a 141 division that those should turn into. Well, I don't. But what I do have, and this is horrible here, let's take a look here. So 141 Looks like it turns into the 36th Division, maybe, because I have no 36th Infantry anywhere. And I indeed have units of the 36th Division. And I have 141 and 142 of that. So I know these are going to be replacement units, and I'll put them there. They're going to be things that I form into. And is it going to cover everything? Well, I think these assault units for the one paratrooper, I think these are units that are probably meant for a scenario that I don't have, you know, maybe the variable historical scenario that doesn't exist. Okay. And this is the kind of decision making I'm going to have to make. Now, this RSG unit, did I miss it? That's possible. I see it here. So I probably need to find where that is. That's turn 2. Okay, another thing is, it's hard to tell what the turns represent. They're not spelled out on here like they are in the SPI version. So we have September 9 a.m. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know. And I go down, and now it's turn 2, 9 p.m. It took me a little while to figure this out. 10 a.m., 10 p.m. I think we're talking September 9th through September 18th, and each turn is basically half a day. So it's a smaller scale than any of the other designs that I've got. And of course, we're going to have the problem of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the Germans. I read the design notes. It doesn't look like there are a lot of German units in the game. It doesn't look like they get a whole hell of a lot in the way of reinforcements. But when I read the design notes, they say, although the player, and this was a problem with Sicily for me, remember, although the players may prosecute the battle however they see fit, much effort was taken to create a framework that addresses the historical events. Some players are thrown off by the different map scales. So one of the maps is a completely different scale than the other. We'll see how that works. Some sense of the capability of naval... Okay. So finally, a German player who wants to... They don't actually give you any kind of hint about what the campaign should play out at like. I guess, you know, and there's no historical notes or anything like that. I guess the assumption is you wouldn't be playing this game if you aren't intimately familiar with World War II campaigns and operations that were played. Of course, that's almost never the case when somebody does something outside of World War II, you know. Yeah, they're going to do the Battle of Poltava. Yeah, they explain everything about it at a very high level, you know. They don't make assumptions that you know what that operation is going to be like. There's sort of just this assumption that all gamers are intimately aware of every facet of World War II. And of course, I barely scratch World War II in my understanding. But anyway, finally, a German player who wants to do well will understand the need for establishing a workable defensive line north of Salerno. Okay. That's helpful, as well as mobilizing strong counterattack force. So I don't think I'm trying to retreat. I think I'm trying to hold the Allies in this game. And we'll see if that's the case. On the other hand, a lazier, too cautious offensive will doom the Allied effort. So that is what's going to be my guiding principle. I'm expecting to see the potential for mobile attacks in this and the potential to stop the Allies. And we'll see how that works. But I've got to start going through the rules. I think this is going to go through a couple of sets, a couple of videos of rules. Even though my intention is to go through this at the base rules at a very high level, because I have covered most of them in the Victory in the West base rules and in the Sicily introduction. However, this looks like it's at least an hour to work through of special rules. So we may be looking at multiple videos for the rules. And we'll see how that works. If we end up with, you know, I take up more time on that than I expect, we may cut the first video there and do a second video on the specific rules for this scenario. Anyway, yeah, some frustration with the setup. Never a good sign. Almost always means that I am going to be starting the game off on the wrong foot. So let's start looking at the core rules for the VCS, variable combat system. One problem with these stiff rule books is they don't hold open very well. So give me a moment. I'll take it. I love these actually. It does take me a couple of hands to handle it. All right. So similar to the Victory in the West system, some of the information on the counters. First of all, you have the different unit types, which are spelled out here now. We're going to see some slight differences as to, I think, what's considered. So like mechanized infantry, I think, are not considered to have the different movement class, but I'm not positive of that. We have a division between mech and non-mech, and I seem to remember seeing that differentiation doesn't include mechanized infantry, but I may be mistaken. It should, because they have the higher movement allowance, but I think it doesn't include them. They don't have. They're okay for mechanized movement, but they don't automatically give you a column shift. They have to be supported by armor, which in this game looks more like tank assets than actual units, which may actually be a more accurate representation, I don't know. But your unit has a morale rating and a color class. And this is for the larger units here. So this will be a morale A blue. Instead of having 3 sets, what the old Victory in the West had was 3 types of morale rating, going 1 through 3, with 3 being the best. And then it had size ratings from A through C, with A being the best. Well, this seems to claim that the morale is the letters that'll be running down the column. And it looks like red units are stronger than blue units. And color class has more to do with the size. They kind of reversed what information is present in that. But the basic idea is when you have these bigger units, what you do is you're going to draw a chit of the appropriate color and look up the right letter on here. Now, in variance from the Victory in the West system, counters don't come out of play when they're picked. One nice thing, since I have only 2 cups needed, I can use my little metal cups instead of I used one big against the odds counter tray to do my randomizing in it. And it means that I can shake them up more easily, and that's good because I am throwing the counters back in. So step losses are going to be handled like in Victory in the West, and yeah, I'm going over stuff that I went in the Victory in the West. On the front side of the counter is your full strength. On the back side is partial strength for step loss. You discard the counter and flip the actual unit over for a cadre, which, you know, is a weakened form of it. Okay. So that's one of the core mechanisms of the design that goes through. You have your normal units that don't have that have a strength, but then they also have the movement allowance. Both types of units have movement allowance. Little airplanes are for air support. I don't know exactly what they're used for or how they're used. They may just be to drop on the board, or to give you a pool of planes that you have available. You can see that was not used in the original system. You have out of supply markers, isolated. You have entrenchment markers for this one instead of entrenchment hexes, and this is important because you're allowed to dig entrenchments throughout the game. That's kind of nice, except it seems like the time frame of this game is even tighter than in the others, and there may not be time to create really sturdy entrenchments. We'll see. this game uses support points. That's a rule from Sicily where every time you make an attack, you're going to spend your support points. And you get those, well, like in Sicily, you get them from depots deployed on the map for the Allies, and for the Germans, who are the only Axis power in this one, you get it from the absence of Allied airfields. Once the Allies start capturing, not those. This map is harder to read than the old one. Oh look, there's highway routes, I think, I don't know. Here we go. We have these, which don't jump out at you in quite the same way. It does produce a more subdued and attractive map, but also one that's harder to play with. And again, the elevation levels are more subdued. They're really not based so much on the color as on these diamonds, but I think we'll get used to them and be able to cope with them better as we go. It's kind of like the difference between the Gamers Line of Battle and their old CWB games, although the CWB games had really hideous terrain level. The layer cake was really ugly on that, so the difference was bigger. I feel like Dunnigan's Sicily map is fairly pretty, but this is probably prettier, yet less readable, I think. And I had enough trouble with the Sicily map, so we'll see if this one actually hurts more. Okay, now optional and variable units only enter under conditions listed in the exclusive rules. I'm not so sure I saw them there, but we'll see. We have a demo counter, which I guess is, if you want to demonstrate that you have a counter. Some robo counters, and there seems to be two flavors of those. Some of which are blown up buildings, and some of which look like road problems. I don't remember there being any interdiction in the game. You can build bridges over rivers. You can destroy bridges. Let's see, these guys. Another interesting thing we're going to see is reserve roles in this. And one of the things that I noted when I was talking about the Victory in the West system is, unlike some other games of its time, and even a little earlier, it doesn't, and actually, I think the variable combat system that it used was used previously. I saw hints of earlier SPI games that had it. But anyway, the sort of standing pattern of that the Panzer Krieg game came up with of using a reserve movement to conduct exploitation wasn't handled in the original system. It's handled here. Okay, we have a somewhat more complicated sequence of play. This is almost lifted again from Sicily, where you check the weather. You do some bookkeeping tasks, which include counting the air points, figuring out how many support points you're going to have, making sure your victory point totals are correct, some special planning, port demolitions are repaired, and then you can check to see if there's any variable reinforcements. And then you go to an air and sea stage where you do your airborne missions, your I guess your landings get set up from the invasion when that's happening, but you also have this port assault, which is a special role. And then you go to the core of the game, and this is really similar to the Victory in the West system. You check supply for all units on the board before a given player turn. Then you're allowed to buy some replacement units or replacement strength. You can add, basically what you do is you're going to get replacement points throughout the game, and you pay support points and replacement points in order to, and victory points, it turns out, in order to increase the quality of your units. Well, not the quality, the size of your units, as it were. So if a unit is damaged, you're able to replace the chit. The rules for it are a little different in this, and we'll get to that when we hit there. Okay, then you have a movement phase where you're allowed to move all your units, but at the same time you designate your reserve units who don't get to move as much, and then you handle combat. An interesting thing in this game is combat is always at the attacking player's discretion. You're not forced to attack. In the Victory in the West system, you're forced to make attacks. And then there's an engineering phase, which is a little bit of additional chrome. There are a lot of engineers in this game, for the Allies especially, and they'll be able to conduct special capabilities, probably relating to blowing bridges and fixing damage to the terrain. And then you reverse it, and the other player gets the same sequence for a player turn. Movement is combined into two different types, tactical and strategic. Well, now we add C movement too, but that'll be in the exclusive rules. When you're using tactical movement, let's see what we got here. So, the difference between tactical and strategic movement. Strategic movement can only be done if you stay outside of a 3-hex zone of any enemy units. And the advantage of it is you get to use special road movement rates. But otherwise, this is pretty much your normal. You get to move from hex to hex. However, you can see there's parenthesized values here. That's for higher level terrain movement, where in some cases, some foot units have pack transport available to them. So they're using pack mules and stuff that allows them to move a little bit more quickly than relying on motorized transport to get their supplies to them. When you enter an enemy zone of control, you have to stop movement. We've already kind of explained strategic movement. C movement will hit in the specialized roles. Okay, terrain effects on movement. Mechanized units basically can't cross things that they're marked as prohibited. Now, do they go into the class of what's mechanized and not? They're spelled out in the exclusive rules. I think the mechanized infantry count as mechanized movement because of their high movement speed. However, they do not, I believe, give you a tank benefit. You retain fractional costs to count on your whole movement. Okay. If you haven't moved at all in the movement phase, you're not adjacent to the enemy, I was wrong, you can't move, and you're in supply, you can slap a reserve marker. And there's only 3 of them in the game. I don't know if it's, I doubt it's limited. And then during the reserve movement phase, you get a reduced movement rate. I think you get half movement, where you can exploit through a gap in the enemy line, or reinforce, a location where maybe you've been weakened or whatever. There won't be combat after the reserve movement, which is, again, a little different from what the Panzerkrieg, I think, model had. Certainly some of the later things allow an exploitation movement and exploitation combat. I think Desert Fox did. Zones of control. Not all units have zones of control. Basically, the big units do. The big units being the ones with a letter class. A zone of control stops your movement. And if you want to leave a zone of control, you have to pay half your movement allowance to do so. This is new. This is in addition to any terrain costs, and you can't go from zone to zone immediately. You can exit one. And what we found in the Victory in the West game was it was fairly easy for an attacking force to go around, especially armored stuff and everything. So this is going to slow down the capacity to quickly outflank units that you're already engaged with. Stacking is 3 combat units per hex normally. However, on beaches, when you land in this system, I believe the exclusive rules are going to allow you a stacking of a 4th unit as long as none of them are big units. If you end up violating the stacking limits, that's okay. You just have to fix it on your next movement phase. And during combat, you're allowed one of the big parent unit. They're called parent units in this, but they're not. I don't know. the larger units. Only one of them can attack or defend in any given hex. The others are just excess there. But other units that are smaller than those large units, which are, for example, these things, and in different games it's different sizes. I think regimental size is the big units in this one, and probably brigades, because they're essentially considered the same, are able to participate up to the stacking limit for that hex. And you can bring multiple stacks into play. Non-participating units contribute something called the integrity bonus, and they also are subject to effects from the combat. Now, that's important because you can take losses on units that are maybe weaker, but also for a whole division, for example, to be together, sometimes they all have to be stacked in the same hex just because of movement limitations, and you can only attack with one of the big units from the division, but you're going for your, you want your divisional integrity in play. We already kind of talked about the morale strength chits there, the user rating, the colors. Many of the units in the game have a fixed strength, however, and they may have a second step on the back, just as you would expect in normal games. Combat may occur between units that are adjacent. It's optional, but if you declare a combat, you must attack all adjacent units, with some exceptions. The combat results table for this system, you look up the terrain that you're in, find the odds, and then you're going to apply a bunch of shifts, and you roll 2 dice on this. It's a highly variable combat system. And combat strength is less important than assets, which give you shifts. Or terrain, for that matter. Entrenchments allow you to double your strength. Being behind river hex lines allow you to double your strength. If the two are together, you triple the strength. But it's only if you're only attacked across rivers that you get that doubling. If you're on a higher elevation level than the enemy, you get a shift in your favor, whichever direction that is. It's possible for multiple units to attack one hex, or for one unit to attack multiple hexes. And it's even possible for, in certain situations, for example, if a unit's here, if there's units here and here, and units here and here, you could have these 2 units attack both of these as a combined force, as long as all attacking units are adjacent to all defending units. That's a pretty rare situation. Usually it's either one unit attacks many, or even more likely, many units are attacking one. I've talked about the integrity bonus to some extent. One nice thing with this game, units of the same command structure have a sort of a color band on them. That's going to help with one of the big problems Victory in the West had, which was my poor eyes could not read just the unit designations. Having the color to jump that out should be very helpful, and it's one of the things I'm really kind of looking forward to about this. You also get a bonus if you're conducting combined arms attacks. Now, one thing that I remember from the Victory in the West system, and it seems to still be the case here, let me make sure. I don't see any limitation on attacking units across terrain you could not normally cross. So you're able to support an attack into terrain that you cannot actually enter, which I always found kind of funny in the Victory in the West, and I am kind of surprised that wasn't changed here. Anyway, combined arms, because armor cannot go in high-level terrain, but they can support it, attacks on it. Combined arms, if you have an armor unit stacked with infantry, mechanized infantry, or engineer, you're eligible for a combined arms column shift, and you're able to get, I believe, 2 of them on attack. Maybe more. I don't see a limit here. No. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're allowed up to 2 of them. Trying to see here. No. Looks like if you're attacking solely across rivers, you're only allowed 1, but otherwise you're allowed as many as you like. And the defender doesn't get combined arms bonus. What they do is if they have combined arms defense, and that includes an anti-tank value. Oh, nope, they changed it. Yeah, so if you have combined arms defense, no combined arms attack works against you. But now, combined arms defense defense, including armor, actually does give you a column shift if you're not being faced with armor or anti-tank units. That's different. So you got to watch out. Some mechanized infantry units have an inherent armor and anti-tank capability, and they should have what? A parenthesized combat strength? No, a circled CA. I thought this was Canadian, and I was wondering why there were U.S. Canadian forces. Here's one. If they have that CA, they get the automatic combined arms. I liked the parenthesized combat strengths over in the Victory in the West. This may be harder for me to internalize and understand. Artillery, if it's within 3 hexes of the hex under attack, you can get a column shift for each artillery you have, but there are limits. I believe the attacker is only allowed 2, and the defender's allowed 1. And you flip your artillery over once it's fired. I don't think I have a counter there. I don't see one kicking around here either. I think they're just blank on the back. And they unflipped at the end of your combat phase. They're allowed to fire in both players' combat phases, both on attack and defense that way. Air support. Based on this scenario-specific rules, and in this case, it's going to be based on those airfields, if I can see them. These guys. And you obviously can't see them if there are counters on top of them. If they're too tiny, they're going to be covered no matter what. There's no way to kind of cheat them into vision, I don't think. Those are going to help determine in the specific rules how many. I'm trying to see if I can see the chart. Here we go. They're going to tell you how many German air points are available based on how many Allied airfields have been taken, how many Allied air points are available, and then the die roll needed for a successful attack or defense shift from air capabilities. I believe you're allowed to put 1 air point into any attack or defense, and if you succeed in the die roll, you end up getting a column shift in your favor. In this case, if you create air support in a town or city hex, it causes a rubble marker. There's naval gunfire, warship units, and there are piles of them here. Probably a detail that I don't really see as that necessary when only one side has ships to actually represent them with counters, but they can be counteracted, which is kind of interesting. They can support ground combat if they're available. The range to the target from the sea hexes is determined by the ship type, and it's going to be in the exclusive rules. And these give you column shifts. I don't believe they require a die roll. They work kind of like artillery, and I don't see any specific limitation to how many naval gunfire you can you can apply. Okay. I've already kind of explained the odds chart. What I haven't explained is the results chart. So the results chart is similar, like I said, to the Victory in the West system. You get a letter, which is either going to be attacker, defender, or both. A number, which is the number of hexes of a retreat you're required to take. A parenthesized result, which is a number of losses that your units are going to have to take that are required to be actual losses. And if you choose, you can take step losses instead of retreat values. Now, there's also both, which means both sides take damage, and both sides could go running away from the battle, I guess. And finally, there's these red things, which are breakthrough results. There are no breakthrough results for the defender. Breakthrough results do a couple of things. When you make an attack, you have to expend a support point. If you get a breakthrough, that support point isn't actually spent. Breakthrough also means that the defender cannot voluntarily take step losses. And the attacker has a more liberal advance after combat. Wow, more charts over here, neat. These are all on the map as well, but I'm going to find this very helpful. Again, something that would have been useful in the original system. After you retreat, after an opponent retreats, if they have to retreat through a zone of control, they take step losses for that. Then the victorious units are allowed to advance, and that all includes the defender is allowed to advance if they win the combat. So like if the attacker takes a loss that they retreat from, the defender's allowed to advance. They usually don't want to, simply because of the sequence of turn play. They might want to go a couple of hexes, but they don't really want to end up adjacent to the enemy because then they have to pay the breakaway costs. Some special effects for the breakthroughs: the attacker gets to choose the defender's path of retreat. The retreated units lose their zone of control during the advance, and the advance after combat is actually not restricted to the path of retreat, and mechanized units get an additional hex. I think that's new, but I'm not positive. I certainly wasn't playing with that in the Victory of the West. Supply. The way you trace supply in this game is similar to the Sicily Victory in the West side. Basically, you can trace, well, it depends on the level terrain that you're in. If you're on 4, 5, or 6 level terrain, you have to trace to an adjacent source, and you trace to a road. And the roads are very, very faint on this, hard to see. Again, makes the game prettier, but less playable. Once you reach a road, then you have to trace back to your ultimate supply source along those road spaces. If you're on level 2 or 3, you can trace up to 3 hexes to a road, but you can only trace them through terrain of level 3 or less. This is different from Victory in the West. There was a real problem with Victory in the West in that if you were on low terrain, you could trace over a mountain, and that was just kind of goofy. And finally, if your entire path of supply to the road is on level 1 terrain, you can trace 4 hexes. Again, this is a little more limited than the Victory in the West system, which is originally was like 6 hexes through all terrain. A little clarification there. If the length of the trace to the road is more than the ranges specified, or if you trace to a road and the road doesn't go to your ultimate supply source, you're then out of supply. If you're out of supply, your attack strength is halved. If you're a mechanized unit, your movement is halved. with a minimum strength of 1. The final thing is, if you're not able to trace to a road at all without going through enemy zones of control, and remember, these smaller units don't have zones of control, only the big guys do, or enemy units for that matter, then you're in an isolated condition, or if there's nowhere on the map that's your ultimate supply source anymore, then your attacking combat strength is 1, defending strength is halved, mechanized units are reduced to 6 movement points, and non-mechanized are halved. They also have a optional rule that I think I'll play with, which is if you're sitting with an isolated marker and you're still isolated, you get a second isolated marker. And then if you continue to be isolated, you roll a die at the end of the mutual supply phase and see if you lose a step from that. And this is similar to the Italian surrender rules in Sicily, honestly. I need to pause, my throat's killing me. It is possible to provide air or sea supply. That's going to cost you, I believe, a support point. If the weather's okay and you make a roll to see if it succeeds, if you're in an enemy zone of control, it's harder. And it will improve your supply level by 1 level. So if you're isolated, you go up to out of supply. If you're out of supply, you go up to normal. I've already kind of talked about support points. I don't think I want to go too much more into them. Except in this game, there's some special rules. If you attack more than 4 times on your whole side, I don't know if that applies to the division between U.S. and British armies here. But if you attack more than 4 times, you have to spend 2 additional support points. You're doing too much. Your support can go negative. If it does, you have a penalty. You can't get bonuses from artillery or parent integrity any longer. Your unit supply status for that nationality is dropped by 1 level. I believe this 4 is for a whole side, the way it's worded here. But engineers are something that are new to this system. You can destroy bridges. You can do this with any supplied combat unit. You have to trace a legal supply path to the bridge no longer than 4 hexes from the unit, and it can't be within 3 hexes of an enemy unit. And then there's a demolition table to see if you succeed. And what is this? This is port demolition. Here's Bridge and Alpine Road. You're able to make a roll. Now it says enemy adjacent gives you a 1. So I don't know. That doesn't sound like it's what it says. Oh, bridges not within 3 hexes of an enemy unit are not eligible for demolition. You can only demolish things that the enemy's coming close to. A combat unit may only attempt to destroy 2 bridges per game turn and never more than 1 shot at any one bridge. If an engineer begins a movement phase adjacent to a demolished bridge and there's no enemy unit adjacent to the engineer or the bridge can be repaired if the engineer stays there for 2 engineering phases. And we have little rebuilding type markers, repairing, whatever, to keep track of those extra moments. If you're in level 5 or 6 terrain, and there's these terrains up here, they're called alpine, but there's no alpine terrain in southern Italy. Pedalpine? It's much smaller. You can try to demolish the road, and again, this is done sort of like the bridges are. Is there a limitation? I don't see it, but any non-mechanized combat unit can repair the road, and you can only do this once per target per friendly engineer. You can't try to demolish a road that has a friendly mechanized unit on it because it wouldn't be allowed to be there. There's these transit tracks, which you're not able to do demolitions from them. Engineers and apparent infantry or mechanized infantry can start and finish 2 consecutive full turns in a hex with no enemy unit within 3 hexes, and they can build an entrenchment, which are these suckers here. Entrenchments will be removed if they're unmanned, and air and naval gunfire can result in a column shift, which will cause a rubble marker. Has no effect on that particular combat. Once there's a rubble marker there, it can be removed by a player whose unit occupies the hex or was the last to pass through. If you use tactical movement, you pay an additional movement point to enter the rubble. If you're defending in a hex with a rubble marker, you get a 1 column shift in your favor, in addition to whatever you get for the town itself. If you advance into combat in a rubble hex, you have to end your advance in that hex. If an engineer is attacking an entrenchment, you get a column shift in your favor. Now remember, the enemy is doubled. That could be worth more than 1 column shift, but it's almost certainly worth 1, just to give you kind of a feel of the gain loss there. Armor and artillery can be assisted crossing unbridged river hexes, as long as there's an engineer with them. Again, this is putting more detail into the game. These things were abstracted into the generalized rules in the Victory in the West. You could cross those rivers. You were assumed to have an engineer with you, essentially. All units that begin the movement phase stacked and adjacent to a river expend their entire movement allowance to accomplish this. The movement may not be into across prohibited terrain or rain or storm turns, and I don't believe it can be done into a zone of control, but I didn't see that. I don't see that. No. Reinforcements. They're listed in order of appearance with codes that signify when they come in, blah, blah, blah. So here they say stage the units at a maximum stacking and move on the board in column, 1 stack behind the other as if the road stopped off the map edge. They don't say anything about the paying extra movement points for that. I assume that's what they mean, because otherwise there's no reason to do it this way that I can think of, except... let's check the movement rules about that in a moment. Seaboard reinforcements enter on a supply depot. Reinforcements can be delayed. Some are variable. You're going to have to pay victory points, maybe support points to get them. You get replacement points by nationality according to a schedule. You cannot save them in this game. Eliminated parent units without affiliated non-cadre survivors on the map, units in zones of control, out-of-supply units, isolated units, and artillery cannot get replacements. And basically what you're doing is you're replacing a step loss. You are allowed to replace units that have been destroyed or cadreed in this game, though. Now, I wanted to look something up on movement, because the old tactical movement... Okay, non-mechanized and mechanized infantry. Yeah, so here's where we get to the weird thing. Mechanized infantry can cross unbridged rivers at half their movement allowance. But mechanized units cannot, and that's the kind of thing. Okay, this does not seem to have the special Sicily rules on increased cost of moving through a hex with your own units in it. They had kind of a road clutter rule. The reason that I'm interested in that is because the reinforcements rule coming in a certain order might make sense because of that. The only thing that I can see the reason for writing it that way is that they intended to say you're paying the movement point costs of all the units that went before you. So if I'm entering through this hex and say it cost me 1 movement point to enter that, I don't know what that is. We have a little picture of what the roads are. My God, we got a lot of different roads. We have roads, main roads. Oh no, unit on road. Yeah, it costs you in tactical movement to move through a unit on a road. And then we have 2 different types of movement here, the main road and the secondary road. This should be spelled out in the rules, and it doesn't appear to be. Now, there's two sets of terrain effects, one for maps A and B and one for map C. Remember, in this game, there are different scales. So map C down here is at a different scale than maps A and B, which is weird because it looks like they kind of connect, but whatever. Yeah, so if you're moving tactically through a hex on the road, you do pay the movement points for the other units, which may be a reason why things enter in sequence and you wouldn't worry about, and then we don't have to worry about entering one after the other on the road, even though that's probably what's actually happening. If you travel off-road, you end up negating some of that, but moving elsewhere. One quick thing, I'm going to load this one up because we're going to do another video on the specific rules for this. There's a lot of blank space here. Now, again, it's presentation or whatever, but this is sort of the opposite of what I would want. I feel like one of the big expenses in publishing these days, including for games, is putting paper, and that's high quality paper there. I would be much happier. I can understand wanting a front page, cover page, but I would be much happier if there were some charts on here. You know, there is one player aid of charts, and that's great and everything. I just feel like there should be something there. Maybe, I don't know what, and you've got the same situation then here, except they do actually use that. The front page has a pretty picture on it. I don't know what could be there. Maybe another copy of the combat results table and some of the key charts or whatever, just so that both people can follow along. The ones on the map, probably pretty hard to follow along on. Of course, you can always photocopy this and present it. All right, and that's what I said with the Victory in the West was, hey, there's like one place where the combat table is. I'm going to send this one up. This will be part A of the Salerno introduction. Part B is going to be the painful part, because then we're going to go into the specific rules, and those are the ones that I neither understand as well, nor do they seem to be as well written. Now, I may think they're not as well written simply because they're completely new to me, and I was reading the standard rules and saying, I understand these rules, and I'm just kind of echoing things that I know and noticing things that I either didn't catch when I was playing Victory in the West, and I did catch a few things in here that are the same that I was forgetting about when I was playing the older game, which is always a reason to reread rules, even in the middle of playing. I read them several times, but they don't sink in. But then also, you know, there are some small variations in it, but this is almost all completely new. So like the fact that it's not as clearly formatted bothers me more, you know. If there aren't references into old rules and stuff like that into the other rules that are in the book, that's a problem. Because I should be able to look them up very easily. But likewise, there's also concepts that are different, like putting together the troops, the naval rules, stuff like that, that are very chromy, fairly complex, and completely new. And then these tracks for movement, again, a little non-intuitive and completely new to me. All right, let's send this sucker up.